Jay,
What's up, buddy?
Jay,
Andrew.
when I look in your eyes, I at times feel a level of sadness I have never felt, as if we, despite barely knowing each other, have been apart for far too long. When I talk to you, it is like I am listening to a voice I've ached for, yet haven't heard in a lifetime. Every other experience I have with you seems familiar, but at the same time, it hurts. Like you would feel if you begged for something, only to receive it when you had already given up hope. These feelings are all so strange and evolving at a rate that scares me, as they are for someone I am only just now truly getting to know. Even with my brief presence...
Oh, he's still going.
I'm still going! Even with my brief presence in your life, I've picked up on so much suffering and almost feel powerless to create any change. There are so many wounds, so many scars, so much I only know enough about to fear. I'm trying to understand. Jay, you have more pain in your life than I can imagine. I hear it in your voice, I see it in your eyes and in the way you move. I just want to see you smile without there being an ocean wall of tears behind your eyes. I want to hear everything you have to say. I want to find a way to heal the damage done until you can forget it ever existed.
That really takes me back to like third grade geography when we learned about like different landforms, like isthmuses and peninsulas and ocean walls.
Yes!
It reminds me of the scene from The Princess Bride. The
Marriage.
Yes. It's a lot like that. Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of the St. Balasar University English Club podcast. We have such an exciting episode for you. You're going to see a lot of familiar faces today. A new novel-length work has been submitted from an old friend of ours, Greg Onision, I don't know his last name.
YouTube.
Greg Onision on YouTube. I'm your host, Andrew.
Yeah, and I'm Jay.
So you're not like a random character from the book this time. That's kind of weird.
No, I'm just myself, but a little more bummed out than usual, I guess.
Are you displaying a certain side of yourself just for this story so that we can see the full extent of the Jay experience?
No, Andrew, I'm concerned about our intellectual integrity with this particular book. I mean, we've approached Greg Onisi on YouTube's work before, and so we're kind of biased against him now, and I don't know that we can be trusted to do this by ourselves.
What do you propose? I mean, it's just you and me.
I mean, yeah, that's another problem too, right? Because, like, I'm a poet, I haven't really written fiction in a long time, so I feel like I'm drifting away from that world more and more. I feel like it might be time to call in some backup.
All right, okay, we're open to that. You know, we have all kinds of great people. Who do you think, Lanny?
I would love to, but I mean, she's just so busy writing the sequel to Handbook for Mortals. How about a good personal friend of ours, Holly, from the fiction MFA here at St. Balasar University?
I guess I could allow that.
That's awesome, because I've actually already got her here in the studio with me. Hey, Holly.
Hi, Jay. Hi, Andrew. Thank you for inviting me to read quite possibly what might be the worst book I've ever encountered.
If you don't mind, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your expertise with our listeners?
Oh, of course. So my name is Holly. I'm in the fiction MFA here at St. Balasar University. I do really like to write YA. I also really like to write Southern Gothic. I'm working on my own novel, which is a Southern Gothic novel, and then a romance novel as well, which is women's fiction romance. And like Jay and Andrew, I also went to St. Balasar's for undergrad, where I did creative writing and psychology. I'm a long-time listener, long-time fan. I'd like to say I'm number one fan.
I wish that I could say I was sorry for subjecting you to this book, but frankly I'm not, because I think your insights are going to be invaluable for us today.
We have brought you, Greg, what you fear the most, an intelligent woman. And I'm really excited to see what this perspective will bring you. I know it can be scary hearing from perspectives that you're not familiar with, but I do think it's valuable to diversify your critique groups as much as possible. And I don't mean that in a token way. We will see here in Stones to Abbigale, I mean, from the title itself, that a female perspective, or at least a female consideration, is very important in this. And maybe someone like Holly, who specializes in women's fiction and young adult, might have a good confluence of skills and experience that could be very beneficial to you.
Not only do you have experience critiquing introductory writing at like the undergraduate level, which I would say this almost qualifies for that.
Yeah,
It maybe even is a little below it.
Yeah.
But also, this book is set in rural America. It centers a female character. This is right in your wheelhouse, I would think.
Yeah, I definitely have ideas and thoughts about it. I definitely think with the right self-reflection, perhaps, it could be something that is okay.
This is definitely one of those books that it feels like before the editing process can even begin or the revision process can even begin, the author maybe needs to reflect on what it is that they believe and want to communicate to the world.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Holly doesn't need to hear this, but in case you do, if you're a new listener, we are the English Club podcast. We are real-life critique partners from a fictional university who have noticed a lot of negativity in the book reviewing space. Our gimmick is we treat all our authors as if they were real participants in our real-life critique group and give them the critique that we think that every writer deserves. We don't always succeed, but we try our best.
Yeah, in a story like this, that can be hard. Obviously, that's always our goal, but sometimes it's not entirely clear what the vision is or was, so we'll do our best to stay aligned with that.
Okay, so without further ado, in case you haven't read the book or need a refresher, we are going to jump into a summary of Stones to Abbigale by Onision.
Abby got out and rested on the warm hood of my mom's car. I said, "How about that? I didn't take you for the stargazing type." She smiled and replied,
It's not just the stars. This is everything. You could look at every part of the earth, and you still wouldn't see as much as you would if you just looked up at the night sky. Looking at the universe has always helped me escape this tiny little life of mine.
I smiled, once again comforted by almost everything her mind had to share with me. I slid on the hood next to her and looked up at the stars as well. What if the stars were like birds, and they just took craps on us? I said as she interrupted with a sarcastic laugh.
Stop. Just stop. You're stupid.
I laughed and out of nowhere asked a question that oddly surprised us both. Do you think we'll have kids someday? She tilted her head and responded jokingly.
Whoa, too fast. I just wanted to look at the entire universe with you. That's all.
That's actually a really good place to stop, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't tell considering all the dialogue. It's just a giant chunk of text.
Right. Man thinks he's Kafka.
Shut up. You did call it almost Kafka-esque in the first episode.
It is almost in the way that, like, everybody acts inhuman and the adults are all children, but the children aren't really children either.
Right.
I've been thinking a lot about this novel. So it just made me feel gross.
Mhm.
And so, like, I don't know.
This is going to be a tricky one, ladies and gentlemen. So, if you recall our Reaper's Creek video, Onision has the spiritual trilogy of 3 books. We started with the one that represents the fullness of his experience. You could call it the Pokemon Emerald of the series.
Or Platinum.
Or Platinum, or Black and White too, but I think of Emerald. I'm a Gen 3 supremacist.
Oh boy.
So this is the Pokemon Sapphire or Pokemon Pearl. This is the good side of Greg. We are to understand that a lot of these events are based off of his real life, and this is like a better version of himself. Which manifests very interestingly. So we'll start just kind of laying out the plot for you and giving you an idea of the life of James.
I don't know about you guys, but I find that starting point to express, like, in a book form the best version of yourself to be very strange, because for one thing, it doesn't seem like it would lend itself very well to like conflict if the character always has to be doing something good.
Right.
But then also because what's actually in the book is not really necessarily like a angelic person or like a particularly good or special person.
Yeah.
No, I mean, when I read it, it read like the narrator thinks he's, the quote unquote nice guy, the good guy, and just seems like victimized by everyone around him, particularly women. I mean, if you take a look at the female character's book, which I'll get in later, he just definitely gives off that I'm a nice guy energy. Why don't you love me? Like, both platonically to his friends, like with Davis, and also the women in his life who happen to be most of the other main characters. He's like, he doesn't seem like a good person. It definitely reads as somebody trying to write a good person, but they're just not.
No clue what it means. It's Plato's allegory of the cave, but for good people.
Yeah.
There it is again. This podcast is becoming Plato's allegory of the cave, but for Plato's allegory of the cave. Like, I feel like we're abstracting it more and more each time we reference it.
Yeah, no, I have a child's understanding of what that even means. I just like saying it. So, James wakes up in his purely white room with an alarm clock that barely ever works, but he keeps it for some inexplicable reason. He dwells on his overcoming depression and his family. He lives with his mother. His father is absent from his life, and his sister, who are both kind of non-entities. Don't worry about it. And he roller skates to school like it's a bad 90s movie for no reason, and like reflects upon like the woes of high school life and all the different types of people that he has to interact with that he doesn't like because he feels like he's an alien, and he's roller skating while doing it. So it's completely ridiculous to me. It feels like the opening of Freddy Got Fingered.
We learn like immediately that he's the type of person who thinks that feeling alienated from other people means that he must automatically be like smarter than them and better than them and more self-aware than them, just because of like a completely subjective feeling of detachment from the people around him.
Yeah, he's a pick-me boy. I'm not like other boys. That's exactly like the skating thing. I've like, why is this necessary, my friend?
It comes through especially strong towards the end of the second, beginning of like the third page, where like there's a fight that breaks out in the school hallways, and he's like, oh, these men who think that conflict can only be solved with fists.
Yes.
Unlike what I think. I'm an enlightened, intellectual, evolved being.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm beyond my ape nature. Like, it's
high level of emotional intelligence we're working with here, so he thinks.
It's kind of like the beginning of Ready Player One, how he just talks about how awful the world is and how he's so much better in comparison just by existing. He's at school. He is in his little art trailer, and he is supposed to be partnered up with this dumb jock that peed in a jar. He just hates him, and then there's this other girl, Abby, who is the most beautiful, mysterious girl he's ever seen, and he stares at her, and then out of nowhere they're about to get this new art assignment, and Abby asks to get switched with James, which is crazy because they have never spoken before.
That could have been a larger focus of like the, I don't know, rising action of the story, them getting to know each other, but instead she just kind of asks to be partnered with him, and then they're like in love from that point on until the rest of the book is over.
It's very 0 to 100 really fast. And I'd like to say that like Abby doesn't even really have enough agency to even be a pick-me girl. She just does this one thing, and that's really the last moment she has in the rest of the novel where she really makes a decision for herself without any other outside influences.
Right. And it's for no reason.
Yeah.
Well, she's acting that way because she's under the thumb of her evil boyfriend, James.
Seth, I think.
Oh, his evil boyfriend, Seth. She will eventually be under the control of her evil boyfriend, James. Evil boyfriend, Seth. So she has to give her number to James in code. That was actually kind of interesting in like a 90s movie kind of way. It just says NISEONE, and that's like the last 7 digits of her phone number. And that's kind of a little clever code.
Yeah, it's a good bit of setting, I think, if nothing else. It tells you something about the world that these letters can be typed in on a phone where like each number on a 9-digit number pad like has 3 letters on it. Then they're talking on the phone and they agree to do their art project together. And then I think then comes the first time that we meet Seth. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. He just like sees them from afar in the bus lot or something, and he's like yelling at her.
Yeah, he's just like screaming at her, and then she has to like apologize to him for having interacted with James or something like that.
It's really weird. So he has a dream about Abby being sucked into the darkness and immediately wakes up and writes her this insane email and sends it to her, and she is not there the next day.
She then starts to make plans to meet up with him before school, and then he asks if she read the email, and she says no, and then when he gets to their assigned meeting time, or appointed meeting time, she's not there, and so he assumes the worst.
Oh yeah, he gets suspended.
Oh yeah, for being beaten up by another jock. What was his name?
Jason.
He gets beaten up by Jason, gets suspended.
And then Abby wants to meet him, right?
Right. Abby wants to meet him behind the church. And she's like, I can't believe you would send me this email. I go through so much, but that doesn't make me broken. But I still love you. It's okay. Let's enter into this relationship with each other.
She's broken. He's okay. That's like the summary of that chapter.
No, literally.
Except then, like, he totally changes his whole perspective on her, like, just by her saying a few things to him where he's like, you were never damaged, only changed. Any part of you that you think died is just hidden, waiting to come out when it's safe.
It's almost like he wants her to have self-esteem issues. It's like, I mean, that's kind of how I read it.
Yeah,
why would he want that? How would he benefit from that in any way?
Benefit from that?
Then we learn that James's mom is seeing a new guy, and she is going to pick up James and his sister and move to this new guy's place, which is across the mountains, whatever that means. This is set in Washington, so I guess those are like the Rockies or something.
And we also meet the sister who he
is so mean to.
He's so mean to her.
Yeah.
It's very troubling.
Is she literally like blonde and dumb?
Yes,
Okay.
She is literally blonde, quote unquote blonde and dumb.
Oh my god. And this results in James's mom moving in with the new stepdad, and then rather than having to transfer schools, James is like, what if I just stay in this apartment? And for some reason, this gets worked out. Maybe the stepdad is rich or something. They never really talked about it too much. But the new family kind of bankrolls James staying at this condo alone.
Yeah, inexplicably they just allow this, and that's a thing that gets resolved later, but it makes sense to just like wrap up that plot thread now because it literally pops up twice, once to set up the conflict and once to just do away with it.
Right.
And it's really weird because there's a scene in between those two where James is worried that if his mom walks in while he and Abby are cuddling platonically or whatever, she'll think that they're having sex and that'll be a big problem. But apparently she's okay with them living together.
Right. You think if it would be such a big deal, they'd stop at one point and not another. So it's just kind of weird, the realism there. I've known parents who've bankrolled their kids living on their own at weird times in their life. So I don't think it's like completely unrealistic, but some of the motivations were kind of lost in translation.
Yeah, it'd be literally easy to explain, but he just doesn't.
The Bildungsroman school scenes kind of continue. He has this friend named Davis. And Holly, what's your impression of our good friend Davis?
Oh boy. Davis is just kind of there to hype up our narrator. He does become, I guess, somewhat important later. But yeah, he just basically has adoration for whatever reason. Who knows? Because our narrator's just a terrible person and like not nice to him at all. But Davis just adores him and like literally yells like, oh, you're the greatest ever. But there is no evidence for that anywhere.
Right. He has no personality outside of loving James and liking stacking colors of Legos in descending order. He communicates almost entirely in random access humor, which almost invariably falls flat.
I really wondered if he was supposed to be like Asperger's coded. I felt like maybe the stacking Legos in a certain color pattern was meant to indicate that. But since we know that this book is like semi-autobiographical, it's also possible that like Onision is just sort of poorly describing a person that he really knew.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say for sure
Right.
what Davis is meant to represent, if anything at all.
Right. I was kind of going down that line of thought with the Legos and stacking them up strategically. And the question that kind of gets raised from there is, to what end? So like you said, maybe it's just he happened to know someone who happened to be autistic, and Greg Onisi on YouTube doesn't understand the connotation of some of these traits, and he's just blindly repeating them because this is what his friend did.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
I could see
extremely
that.
likely. That's a thing that definitely comes up in a lot of beginner fiction, is just translating real life experiences into text without realizing that in the context of a story, these things take on symbolic weight.
Right.
They're not representations of reality anymore. They're
I mean, I would say you're never just writing anything. You know, you're always providing commentary, whether or not it's on purpose. And if Greg Onisi on YouTube is trying to portray this character and, you know, have that representation, there's no connotation for that, and it ends up doing more harm than good in that way, because it's not, the commentary is this person exists and they only exist in the context of what we would maybe describe as like more neurotypical people, and that does a lot more harm than it does good in the long run.
Yeah.
And in the immediate novel, especially knowing what Davis's fate is, like that's just kind of icky.
Yeah, we never see him in any other context.
We never see him in any other context, and I feel like that's just really not serving the purpose that perhaps it could better serve.
Yeah, I think Onision likely just doesn't realize that when you put information in a story, it does more than just communicate like what is actually occurring narratively. It takes on other kinds of meaning depending on how it's portrayed in the story and like what it comes to ultimately.
Yeah, something we've done in fiction workshops at St. Balasar's in the MFA is we have a chart, and in one side of the chart we'll write an observation such as Davis could be viewed as a character on the spectrum. The interpretation of that would be something along the lines of maybe Greg Onisi on YouTube is trying to have more representation in the novel, and then the explanation, or, you know, the evaluation of it, I like evaluation a little bit better, would be it's just not being done well. So this idea of what do you see, what does that mean, and what does that mean in the context of the novel as a whole?
Well, that's Davis then, until his fate that you alluded to. There's so many chapters that just end with James and Abby just cuddling and him saying something like, she is everything to me. And then the next chapter will be like a single scene, essentially, where they're just in school, and then they'll be cuddling, and then it's like, without her, I'm nothing.
He's down bad, and it's not even in a sweet way. It's just creepy.
It's also very boring.
It's very boring. I feel like at its heart, Greg Onisi on YouTube wanted to write a romance novel, but just felt like that would perhaps threaten parts of his identity.
Well, yeah, when you state that the main character is yourself, you can't have, or it becomes harder to have him be rejected or do any wrong.
Right.
Because then you're sort of admitting something.
Yeah.
So I think we should probably talk about the next major plot beat, which is not a great one.
Who wants that one?
I'll take it since I brought it up. I want to get past it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we've been kind of avoiding this.
Yeah, so this is really
Content warning.
where the story
content warning.
begins. Content warning for the story happening finally. So basically Seth, Abby's boyfriend, who we've encountered I think twice up to this point, shoots up the school. And James arrives just as the shooting is beginning, so he leaps off the school bus and right into the active shooting situation. He thinks Abby's in the school, which is, of course, why he goes in the first place. So he does encounter Seth, but at this point, Seth has already had an encounter and a fight with the gym teacher, so he's kind of like bruised and he's dragging himself down the hall. James wants to be the one to take Seth out, but before he can, Jason, the bully jock, jumps in and like beats Seth within an inch of his life. He ends up in a coma, and that's the last we hear of him for the rest of the story, if I remember right.
Yeah.
No, that is true. I mean, we learned that he's in the hospital like later, like towards the end, but other than that, that was very surprising. I'm sorry, did we mention that Greg Onisi on YouTube / James roller skated into the school and had to take off his roller skates because there was so much blood?
Oh, right, yeah, he didn't want his roller skates to slip in all of the blood, and he ends up cutting his feet up with a bunch of glass shards because he's barefoot
Yeah.
now. Should
So
put a button on that, though. Abby's not in the school. James ends up getting out, and he finds Abby already waiting outside with the EMTs, who also bandage him up. And then she basically moves in with him.
yeah. Yeah, they live in that little apartment that James's stepdad bankrolls, allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
Life continues. The real life actual president comes around after a period of recovery and calls out James specifically.
Yeah, the president refers to him as the boy who almost saved the day or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. There's also lots of platonic cuddling going on between James and Abby.
Oh yeah, yeah, and they don't kiss on the lips for like a while. They were sharing a bed but had not kissed each other on the lips until some random point towards the 50% mark.
I wondered if there was something behind that. Like, it seems like the book wants to make a point of how capable of being chaste James is, which I think maybe is there to contrast him with the other men we learn have played a role in Abby's life, which is one of the next big things that happens. She starts revealing her traumatic past to James in these pages-long exposition dumps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a good time to kind of go over some of the adult minor characters, because a lot of this plays into Abigail's dramatic backstory. There is the school bus driver, who is kind of a character, kind of not, who lets James jump off and run into the school during an active shooting. There is a plethora of teachers who all talk the exact same way, in that they all call like the same group of people jocks. They all are similarly mean-spirited and all hate their children. And then there is Miss Johnson, who is a guidance counselor. She starts out being pretty sweet, but kind of concerned for James. And as James and Abby get closer, especially after the shooting, she starts to warn him that Abby is, and I quote, damaged goods, and that James needs to stay away from her.
Miss Robertson's a really interesting character because I agree. I think she starts off and I'm like, okay, this fits with the rest of the novel. I mean, it's a flat character, but like she's not a terrible person totally. And then as you go through the novel, if you want to call it that, or novella, whatever it is, she just becomes like reprehensible, really. I mean, I have to say, it's like a pretty good plot twist, in my opinion. At least the idea behind it. Not in the sense that it's okay, but in the sense that you maybe don't see it coming. Because it seems like she's the one almost redeemable adult in the story.
Right.
She really fills this strange role that reminds me a lot of like a forest witch in a fantasy novel. She's like, James, beware of Abby and her dark secrets. But, like, she refuses to tell him.
Exactly.
But she'll just continually make these little prophetic statements that, I don't know, seem almost, like, playful for her. Like, for her, it's fun to withhold this information from him.
Yeah. I mean, she definitely likes the drama, because she mentions something about, like, the confidentiality, and, confidentiality is already being violated with her saying the thing about Abby being quote unquote damaged goods based on what she's told her. Like, that's not allowed in therapy settings, even that statement.
All right.
So she's just torturing him.
At some point, Abby's alcoholic father is introduced, and then he is immediately taken out of the picture by a passing police officer because he's in some drunken rage on the front porch, throwing bottles and stuff at Abby.
That scene is interesting. I think it's worthy of a little bit more information. So the police officer is there from the start. Like, James is walking Abby home, if I remember right, and the abusive father, like, storms out the front door and immediately starts screaming at them. But it's not until he starts throwing things that the police officer, who's there the whole time, sort of, like, down the street, literally sicks the dog on the father, and, like, the dog, like, takes him out.
Drags him away screaming into oblivion.
Yeah, and then James, like, has some, I don't know, very pretentious reflection about, like, how the nature of the justice system is corrupt or whatever. Like, the police won't get involved until it's already too late or something. But doesn't make sense in context, and it also doesn't really reflect reality either. So it's frankly completely pointless.
It is revealed that Abby had become pregnant in a previous relationship. And upon learning this, her ex-boyfriend Seth promptly punches her in the stomach, which enrages dear Miss Johnson because Miss Johnson is pro-life.
Doesn't her getting beaten up by Seth like cause the pregnancy to fail?
Yes.
Yeah, and also I would just like to point out that it's not even a pregnancy from a previous relationship. She was like sexually assaulted, and the pregnancy resulted from that.
Well, Miss Robertson
Yeah.
like wants her to carry the baby to term, but then
Seth beats her up and causes her to miscarry, basically.
and then Mrs. Robertson claims that she's lying, that she got the baby aborted, and that she's like the bad person. Which, if the book was going to center around any kind of conflict, I think this would be the most interesting one. However, I don't think that Onision is the person to do that focusing.
No, absolutely not. There's no way he could have handled this tactfully.
No, not at all. But I think that this presents the most interesting conflict in the sense that, like, there's an interesting imbalance of power. There's people in positions of power that hold really reprehensible values, which I'm sure is a thing that does happen out there.
Like, again, this goes back to she's not really being a counselor. She's like pushing her own beliefs on Abby, who's gone through this severely traumatic thing. You know, Abby really, her father's abusive, her boyfriend's abusive. She gets horrifically sexually assaulted, becomes pregnant from the sexual assault. And Miss Robertson, who she feels safe with, she discloses all this to. And then Miss Robertson turns on her too and wants to push her own agenda instead of actually trying to support Abby in whatever choice she ends up making. She should be, I don't know if it's disbarred for counselors, but like she's not
disbarred.
She should lose like her license for this though.
Right. No, literally. Well, and we know that she's not all there, so.
And Miss Robertson's using her place of power to bully a child. Which,
right.
I mean, that's really what it is. This Onision on YouTube is not the person to be talking about this, but kind of like Jay said, I do think it's something that happens. I'm sure it is.
What could potentially make this into an interesting story is the misuse of power and the imbalance of power between Abby and Mrs. Robertson. But again, Onision clearly does not have the tact to be able to write this story.
No.
However, I do think that there is a story here.
Somewhere.
And I think we can get there later, but I do think at the heart of this story, power and the misuse of it is one of the biggest themes.
Yeah. James just starts driving to school, and he takes his little buddies, Davis and Abby, with him.
Oh, right.
They come across, on a bridge, a man about to jump off. While the car is driving, Davis jumps out, runs with no regard for traffic, trying to save this man, and fails because he is promptly smacked by a truck. Thus dies Davis.
And it's described like a physical comedy scene.
Yes!
It is horrible.
This is so funny.
It's like slapstick, almost.
He like flips up over the front of an 18-wheeler or something
Yeah,
and like spins in the air.
It's terrible.
It's really bad.
And then the guy who had just jumped off the bridge is not brought back into the story at all. It all just happens so that Davis could be hit by a car. Whoever he was, it is totally irrelevant to the story. So for some reason, after Davis dies, James decides that it's all his fault. He decides that if he hadn't been friends with Davis, then Davis never would have been in his car, so Davis never would have died, which is the weirdest, most self-victimizing way of processing this trauma.
Pick me, boy.
Yeah. So they go to the funeral, and James is convinced that Davis's mom is going to call him a terrible person and like blame everything on him. And so James is basically expecting that the funeral is really going to be about his character and like a character assassination happening during the eulogy. But instead, wonder of wonders, Davis's mom gets up and talks about how wonderful Davis was, of course, but then goes on to talk about how wonderful James is, and how he was such a good friend to Davis. Now Davis was always talking about James, blah 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 blah.
And that James is handsome.
Also, yes. Handsome. Conflict resolved, story beat over, we move right on.
And Abby is also there, and I just imagine her like in the corner, like weeping like prettily with, dotting her eyes, and James is like, wow, she's so beautiful, sobbing.
She's probably wearing a bonnet or something.
Yeah.
And then the school gets burned down.
Yeah.
James learns that at one point Abby had texted Seth, the school shooter, I just wish that everyone would disappear, and that could be construed as possibly having tipped off Seth to do something about it, I guess. And he's running out, and Miss Robertson is screaming like, "No, James, don't. She's crazy. She started this whole thing. She made Seth do what he did." And like this results in the school burning down.
Yeah, and before that, don't forget, they just randomly make out in the middle of class, too.
Yes, they make out in the middle of the class.
Yeah.
Yep. So someone throws black paint on Abby, and then they're like, "Oh, you started this," and then the principal is like, "No, she didn't. I'm going to fire you, evil counselor lady." And that's
because she started the rumor that Abby caused the school shooting by at some point in the past texting Seth like, "I wish everyone would disappear." But then she gets found out for having started the rumor, and then out of rage, she burns the school down. Is that right?
That's how I read it.
Yep.
And then she, of course, gets caught off screen.
They wake up to the news report.
And the book is over.
James looks to Abigail and says, "Well, I guess I can't be class president anymore." And that's it.
Because at one point, Mr. Hanson, that's just one of the teachers who wanted James to be his TA, reveals at the end that this was all some elaborate scheme to get him elected class president.
Which does not matter.
It does not matter. That has about as much book space as the 2 sentences it took me to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it turns out Mr. Hanson making James a TA and doing a bunch of other stuff in the background that literally doesn't matter or really relate to the other stuff that happens in the book was all this like plan to groom James for power. And they say that the school president at this school has real power and can really change things. But then it doesn't matter anyway, so who knows why they brought it up at all.
Wow. Okay. Worst summary we have ever done. Let's go into our good stuff. We need to get a good Davis scene.
Do we?
When you first started reading the first one, Andrew, all I could think is, okay, is this Davis saying something to our narrator, or is our narrator saying this to Abby? But then I figured it out.
Right?
But it took a minute.
I love how his mom said that Davis always found him handsome in the funeral.
Is Davis supposed to be gay?
Maybe? I don't know.
It's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was, like, if Davis was gay or if it was just, like, some cartoonish, like, hero worship kind of thing. Like, he literally felt like a little cheerleader, on the sidelines cheering on our narrator for whatever reason. He really wasn't even that nice to him.
No. He never said anything of substance. Like, it totally lacked specificity. It was just like, you're really cool, but not for any particular reason or because of anything he did.
Where was Poopy Poop Poop? Look for Poopy Poop Poop. Don't you remember that?
Oh, there it is.
Jay, how about you narrate from Davis Could?
Oh, Andrew. I would narrate anything for you.
Oh my god.
Davis could see my upset posture out his window as the bus pulled up, so as I walked up the steps this time, he screamed,
"I love you so much. I wish you were my boyfriend."
I hated myself for giving in yet again, but laughter escaped me. My life was turning completely upside down, and Davis was there to make me experience a fragment of happiness. As I sat down, Davis grabbed me and hugged me. Someone sitting a few seats ahead of us screamed,
"Ew, homos!"
which made Davis yell back,
"I love him! This is love!"
He jumped onto the seat with his little body and
Ew.
pressed our faces side by side.
"Look at our love!"
I patted his arm that had been wrapped around me sarcastically as he released me to sit down. Immediately he asked,
"So what's up, buddy? How can I turn that frown upside poopy poop poop?" We'll stop there. But I think that's very illustrative of the relationship these two people have. Oh my god.
I don't even understand, what kind of humor he's going for there. I'm feeling like branching out, Andrew. Having Holly here has really perked me up. I was feeling a little blue at the beginning. Now I'm feeling right as rain. And I have something positive to say.
Okay, let's hear it.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
This might be the first time I have ever started this section willingly.
Yeah, it probably is.
I really appreciate that Onision understands, on some level, even if it's not fully conscious, setup and payoff.
Okay.
There is a scene early on where they mention that there is a church near the school that is not busy on weekdays, so the kids can sneak off to behind the church if they ever want to smoke or exchange secrets without the teachers knowing where they are. This church is used for this function several times, usually for conversations between James and Abby, and it's set up as being this kind of place like a couple chapters before it actually comes into play. So I appreciate that there is an understanding there of like setting up a plot detail that will become relevant later. There's a few other places where little things like that happen, and I think that that's good storytelling craft execution.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with that. There was a very satisfying chiasmus, very minor, but it really stuck out to me. It starts out with he's waking up and the alarm clock isn't working because it's like a crappy alarm clock. And he's like, oh, this always happens. And then at the very end, the alarm clock, it just happens to work at the right time. And that's like a cute little, oh, remember how far that we've come. Again, doesn't work under too much thought, but it was there. And I thought that was interesting that it was included.
Yeah, I didn't even catch that one. That's a good catch.
There were some good descriptions that I noticed throughout. There was a couple places, especially early on, when he's like describing the teacher, and then there's a couple other really small settings with the school that work really nicely, and some tags too that gave me a really good image of like what this area that James the character is in.
When the prose is formatted correctly, it's very, very competent.
Yeah.
So I know we give him a hard time, but like I did kind of like Davis. This is mostly like metatextual because a character presented positively without any other dark twist to them is so rare. And I know he dies in a cartoonish fashion, but I mean like in his character, there's no like dark twist. You know, like how in Reaper's Creek, how every character was either alcoholic or fat or Christian.
Right. Yeah, there was no fat shaming in this one.
There wasn't, yeah.
That's always a bonus.
Always a bonus.
There was a strong dislike of jocks, though, so I guess in Onision's mind, if you're not, like, right in the middle in terms of body type,
right?
If you're not just, like, skinny but no muscle, then you're a bad person.
Well, think about it from his perspective, you know? If everyone else is average, then he can be different.
Yeah.
There was one joke that I liked where the mean art teacher says that if anybody has a problem with something that she says, they can call her hotline, which is 1-800-BOO-HOO.
Yeah.
I don't know. In a better book, it would have been good characterization.
I feel like teachers have catchphrases.
That sounds like a real thing.
Yeah.
Feels like something that actually came from his life.
That did make me smile. I'll give it that.
There was an interaction between Davis and the bus driver where Davis is like, oh, bus driver, you're our hero for getting us away from the situation. And the bus driver's like, oh, yeah, well, what's my name? And Davis didn't know. And it's kind of like a haha little humanizing moment. It made the characters feel a little bit more, not even real, but quirky / pause.
It's memorable, if nothing else.
Memorable.
But I think that is the ultimate problem with complimenting just about anything in this book is that it comes to nothing at all.
Right. That's the shame of this book being a novella length that is impossible to describe and also impossible to remember. It just kind of passes over you as vague, shifting feelings.
It does feel so vague.
I think so too. I know one thing that I noticed when I was reading it, and I don't know if this was on purpose or not, but I do feel like I understood more of it because I feel like in order to write this novel, our author perhaps did some research because the bus thing is a not a spoof, but like a part of 16 Candles.
Okay.
Mrs. Robertson, the guidance counselor, reminds me a lot of Lisa Kudrow from Easy A, which is another teen movie, because the guidance counselor starts out okay, and then it's later revealed she's like kind of a terrible person. Doesn't set fire to the school in Easy A. But there is a lot of moments like that where I could see like, okay, perhaps Greg Onision on YouTube tried to do some research.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's just me reading too much between the lines, but there was a lot of moments like that when I saw other conventions that might be used in media targeted at this age group.
Yeah, it seems like I didn't pick up on any of that, but now that you say it, it makes total sense. It seems like maybe he's trying self-consciously to play into like this 90s teen coming of age genre. Like maybe he is actually trying to use the tropes of a genre in order to make his book feel like it fits into it. That could totally be.
Yeah, and I've been joking about making out in the middle of class and how unrealistic that is. But pick any teen movie, teen TV show
Right.
the past 25 years and it happens. You know, I was watching She's All That the other day. And I don't think it happens there, but there's that same kind of vibe to it, you know?
Yeah, like, I don't think that happens in Ferris Bueller either, but, like, I could imagine that scene with Ferris Bueller style camera work.
Oh, yeah.
If that makes sense. So that's something. Or at least not nothing.
The sociopathic efficiency with which you describe fight scenes is effective. It's scary. It's very, very scary. But I believe that you know how to incapacitate someone. So
I don't.
You don't?
I don't believe it for a second.
Don't either.
Not at all. Fights are not this choreographed.
The guy was in special forces training in the Air Force. Like, I bet he knows.
I bet he spent a lot of time thinking about how he would take out a group of jocks.
Okay, yeah,
I'll give you that.
Fair.
I bet he fantasizes about it quite a bit. You can tell that this scene has been worked over a bit more than the rest.
Yeah, I don't know. This is, again, extra textual, but I know that he has quite the military experience, so I just kind of imagined that this came from some training that he had done. But maybe I'm just turning my brain off.
Did you have any thoughts about that scene, Holly?
I mean, it's like the rest of the novel. I just read it. Like,
I just read it.
I just read it, and I was like, well, that just happened. I mean, I will say, it can be difficult to write fight scenes, like, you know, because there is, as a writer, you do kind of have to choreograph them, but it happened. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah, it's very Aristotelian in that way.
Shut up. And speaking of turning my brain off, there were times where I could almost get cozy with James and Abby's relationship. These were very few and far between, but it was like, there was one scene where he was like writing on her hand and she was writing on his, and I'm like, okay, that's something like a weird couple would do in high school. That's cute. I can get behind that.
There were moments as well where I wanted to believe that their relationship was nice, but I think for me what undercuts it is knowing that an adult wrote this book and that the relationship is never examined in any way, in a way that you would want it to be, like, metatextually by an adult.
Right. It's one of those things where, you know, like, after the camera stops rolling, that this relationship will fall apart, like, objectively. And having a little bit more of a nod to that is something that could be desired. There is media that presents really, really bad relationships in compelling ways that doesn't go out of their way to say, oh, this will inevitably fall apart. This is a bad idea. The movie Licorice Pizza is a great example of this. It can be done, but maybe this is not quite self-explanatory.
Yeah, I have a lot of commentary on their relationship, but I don't think it's appropriate for this segment. I did not ship them, needless to say, so perhaps I should hold off on that, because I think for me, it was just colored, their relationship, by so many other things that there was at no point that I was ever comfortable with it.
Yeah.
It felt, but we can save that.
We can save that.
Well, it seems like we're naturally trending towards critiques.
Yep.
Was there anything else good that anybody had? Because I gotta be honest, I'm plumb out of ideas.
Didn't take me long to read it.
Didn't take me long to read it.
Yeah, it took me about 1 edible's worth to read. And boy, did I need that assist. Thank you, Edible, for the layup on that one.
Thank you, Big Edible. All right, Greg. Well, you've had the good stuff. We've laid out what we like about this story, but like with anything, there's always room for improvement. Our next segment is hard for a lot of writers, but it is important. We'd like to lay out things where we felt that you fell short of your vision and what you could possibly do to elevate this work without compromising what compelled you to do it in the first place.
Yeah, Greg, you really did it this time. Sorry, that's not as nice as what Andrew said.
I don't know if this would be a good thing to read, like the scene where they like literally make out in the middle of class. Like, I cannot stop thinking about that.
Yes,
and how weird it is. But that's kind of a long passage. But if there's something in there, I could read that.
No, I think that's a good idea.
He like lifts her leg, right?
Oh yeah, they like.
So I'm looking for lift.
They like go to town.
They suck tongues. Look up tongue.
Oh
yeah. It's like very.
And the teacher says not again, which is a very, very clever world building trick.
Yeah. Oh, they said the word.
I was going to say, Andrew, every time I use the word again in something, I do think about you and how you said that was the most powerful word. Approaching her class door, I aggressively pulled it open and walked across the room towards Abby. Her teacher screamed,
"Excuse me, son."
and one of the students yelled out,
"Oh God, not again."
I ignored both of them, grabbing Abby by the center of her back and backing up of her leg, lifting her up to wrap her legs around me. She said, her voice shaking, James. I sat her on her desk and pulled her neck towards me, kissing her deeply and passionately, ignoring everything but her.
"Unacceptable!"
The teacher screamed angrily as the class erupted with,
"Ooh!"
just like I had heard in the earlier fistfights. It was the first time I felt anything positive from hearing that sound. I continued to deeply kiss Abby, sticking my tongue in her mouth. She sucked on my tongue, matching my passion. She bit my lip and I bit hers. We were disgusting and beautiful together in the same instance, showing no shame for our raw passion. Should I keep going?
That's probably good.
That's probably good.
I think I've had enough.
It's sufficient.
I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, I read that twice. I was like, is this something that's actually happening?
Yeah. It almost seems like it's about to be like, and then we woke up.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Greg, usually I like to lead with softballs up front, but I think a lot of your small problems stem from one innocuous, almost invisible thing, which is the handling of every single adult character in the story. All of them are weird and mean and completely tactless and enable James and all the characters, but mostly James, to do things that are just completely unrealistic. The bus driver lets him off the bus so he can run into the school during the shooting. Everything about the guidance counselor even existing. All of the teachers, one of them calls him a slur. It's just very, very bizarre. This creates huge believability problems that permeate the entire world. With this kind of genre, I can tolerate larger than life kids because this is a weird kid story for weird kids. But there has to be some kind of anchor of normalcy.
Yep.
There's nothing different from the guidance counselor from any other adult in the story. So when she starts trying to bully a child and then burns down the school, this comes as this enormous shock, which I don't think was necessarily the intention, even though it is supposed to be a quote-unquote twist. It would be nice to have some indication that this woman was crazy before it was all revealed.
Yeah, I think an indicator of a good twist is I didn't see that coming, but now I see that I should have.
Mm-hmm.
And that second piece is completely missing.
Right.
Miss Robertson seems like a bad person, but in kind of a just she's a bad person way. She doesn't seem prepared to literally burn down an entire school.
Right.
And I think, too, sometimes to amplify a bad person or, a villain in a novel, having other characters that aren't bad people can really amplify it, just kind of like what you said, Jay. And I think there was a lot of opportunities for that to happen. I think there was a missed opportunity with both the mother and the stepfather. I think Mr. Hansen, the teacher he TA'd for, was an attempt at maybe a somewhat good adult, but in the end, he just was really rude to James and wasn't really a mentor of any kind. The bus driver thing, that just would never happen.
Right,
I
right.
refuse to believe that. And that could have given James more of a chance to take agency. For example, if the bus driver hadn't let him out, if James wants to be all big and bad, he could have broke a window and run through. That's dramatic, but it's giving your main character more chances to act with agency, basically, when you put obstacles and make things harder for them.
To make him make decisions.
Yeah.
Right. Do character things.
Andrew, I really liked what you said about if there's no anchor of normalcy, then the weird stuff doesn't seem weird enough. I think that's so key. When everyone's weird, no one is.
Yes.
And even in a Ferris Bueller type story, which I think fits into this genre fairly well as well, there's these weird larger than life characters, but then there's a Cameron to keep us bound to sense, and this book doesn't have that. It's all weirdos all the time, and it makes it feel sort of intangible, I think.
Why was it this guidance counselor and not the teacher that called James the F-slur? Or the gym teacher who said that Seth was a douche or a jerk or, completely dismissed this troubled kid.
There's also too many adult characters.
Yeah.
They're easy to lose track of. Some of them are never named. There's multiple different substitute teachers.
The president just shows up for no
The
reason.
president just shows up.
And we're not told which president it is, and
No.
nor does he seem to be like an allegory for any existing president, nor does he feel like an original president character, like a fake one.
Yeah, I watched, oh my gosh, what's it called? Red, White, and Royal Blue, where Uma Thurman is the president.
Okay.
But, like, it's an original president, and it makes sense in the context of it, because it's very clear in this story that this is not the time and the place we're living in. But here, that's not really ever made clear, and so just a faceless, nameless president doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Mhm.
And, you know, kind of going off of borrowing from Red, White, and Royal Blue, you know, in that the president is a woman. I don't know, Onision, not to scare you, but perhaps that could be a potential option, is to have the president be a female character, which would add a lot of nuance to overall female characters.
Not to scare you, James.
Yeah, James, I'm so sorry if my presence is frightening to you.
Sorry for the feminism jump scare.
Yeah, just wait. So, Greg, Onision, YouTube, I do have a bone to pick with you. I really do.
What? I'm aghast.
You know, I really think you should watch the Barbie movie. That might help you situate what I'm about to say a little bit more, give you a good one-on-one introduction. But...
Quick straw poll, sorry to interrupt.
No, please go for it.
Do we think that Onision has seen the Barbie movie?
No way.
If he did not understand it.
Okay. I also don't think so. So I guess we're all in agreement.
You know, as I was reading this novel, I went in with no expectations, but all the female characters seem to follow this kind of Madonna, the other word I'm not going to say because I don't like it, promiscuous woman complex, if you will. And it's really interesting to me because in this novel, you know, the sister, this is the best example, so I'm going to go with this first. The sister is seen by James as basically a dumb blonde. I think he even calls her something akin to that, and is really interested in her, like, what she is doing sexually with men or other boys, and judges her really harshly for that. Later in the novel, a guy she was seeing is killed in the school shooting. It is at that point that James is like, oh, maybe she's not promiscuous, and maybe that actually makes her a person, is kind of the interiority through line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just a good summary for the whole novel. You know, he sees Abby, really has, at the beginning, that moment of agency where she chooses him, and then the rest of the story, she's just kind of an ornament for all the decisions that James makes. Abby exists to amplify the good guy-ness of James, you know. Abby reveals these things about herself, and James, who's not like other boys, is like, oh, well, these other guys have looked down upon you for stuff out of your control, but I don't. And so I think that overall is my biggest critique. And Miss Robertson, you know, she's kind of this mother figure that turns on him and is evil for various reasons. But it's just really interesting to me how she just becomes very one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
Abby, specifically.
Yeah, all she does is deliver trauma backstory and sort of like physically interact with James in like romantic ways.
Yeah.
We get maybe one moment where it seems like she might have a character moment when they're stargazing,
Mm-hmm.
and she expresses an interest in something, but then that is immediately twisted into a conversation about having kids.
It's like she narratively dies the second that she confronts him about the email at first, because that's like the only time she reacted negatively to anything James said or did.
Yeah.
And then from then on, she's just ride or die.
She's like subsumed into his character almost.
Yeah. It's very damsel in distress. Like, you know, he saves her from the dad.
Yes.
He metaphorically saves her from Miss Robinson, from the other boys. From judgment is how it feels like he saves her from. And it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier with commentary. Like, what does it mean to have this character who has a semblance of agency at the beginning, a female character, and then once she becomes involved with our main character, who is quote-unquote a nice guy, she loses all sense of autonomy. She loses all sense of her own being and just kind of becomes this stock character for him, which I think is really problematic, especially if your target audience is young adults who may be reading this, especially, again, jump scare, Greg, young women who might read this and see they have to make themselves less than to garner attention. And then there's also this weird thing about them sleeping together and how so much emphasis is put on how they don't do certain things physically until a certain time. And then Abby seems to lose even more agency after they have sex together for the first time.
I also think it's really interesting that when James, quote unquote, rescues her from her abusive father, she is no longer then like under his household, but she moves into James's house, which is at that point only his house because the rest of his family is gone. And from that point on, like, she literally is a part of his household.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a moment in which there is symbolism, which I imagine Onision did not intend, that paints James as like very unsavory.
Yeah, I mean, I said earlier that I just can't go for this relationship at any point, and it's kind of for those reasons. I feel like James himself doesn't even really see her as a person. He sees her as something he can have, and then once he has her, he's done the thing. Like, he becomes obsessed with her, and it's not healthy. I mean, if Abby was my friend, I would tell her to dump this guy, like, just to be totally honest. It's very love bombing. It's painted as this healthy relationship, and it's just not.
The way he talks about her, like, completing him.
Yes.
Seems to suggest that she is literally some kind of, like, balm for his ailments rather than, like, an independent person who also would like to learn and grow and develop as she ages. Who probably also has internal monologues, which of course the narrative doesn't give us access to. Also shouldn't have to give us access to it for her to be realized as a three-dimensional being in the story.
Abby is very much so, in James's mind, a puzzle piece to his life and not her own separate puzzle. She's not viewed through the lens of this novel, I would argue either through James or through our author, as a complete full person with her own complete full ideas and thoughts.
Mm-hmm. She has a backstory, but even that is defined entirely by what other men have acted upon her.
Yes. And going off of that, I think it's really interesting and horrifying that Mrs. Robertson, our guidance counselor, when she discloses to another woman, there's an opportunity for, another woman to help out this younger woman, and Miss Robertson turns completely on her. So there's this weird, I don't know exactly how to describe it, there's this weird kind of undertext of Abby can only find this quote-unquote rescue in another man.
Yeah.
And not in herself, not in another woman.
Doesn't she even say at one point, like, the only reason I stayed with Seth is because he saved me? Like, he kept me safe from...
Yes.
Yeah. And now James is filling that role.
Right.
I'll be the one to go out on a limb and say, yikes. This is a little bit problematic, you guys. I don't know if it's really good stuff to be putting in your story, Onision. I'm sorry.
I'm not. I think
No,
I'll say it. I mean, he's already afraid of me, so why not just go the full Bonte with it? No, I take it back. He probably muted that part of the podcast, and he's just waiting to hear someone else speak.
Yes.
He probably put the podcast into one of those, like, audio transcribers that can tell voices apart.
Right.
And then he, like, named your voice and then just deleted that from the transcript.
Right. Yeah.
To be honest, I think we've done a pretty good job of, like, really analyzing some of these pieces, but I don't even know how to start fixing them.
Easy fix. Contrive a better reason for James to keep his crappy alarm clock. We touched on it a little bit. I really like the chiasmus there. It does not make any sense, though, that he would keep around a cheap, crappy alarm clock.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, like, oh, it was the last thing my dad gave me before he left, or something stupid and one line like that, just so we could justify its inclusion, because I really like it. But that's not really a big change.
This is a bigger fix, but I've been thinking a lot about the narrative structure of the novel, and I know we've had the comment that there really is no anchor to it. We don't really know what's going on. I think Greg Onision on YouTube, just a very simple place to start would be to plot out what it is you want to happen in this story. I think there needs to be, from the first chapter or two, a clear desire that James has beyond just wanting to be with Abby, unless you want to switch genre and go to a more romance convention. I think more research needs to be done on these things you want to include, such as school shooting, which was not handled well in this at all. I think it's, as a YA novel, that's really unfortunately something that a lot of people deal with these days, this fear of something like that happening. I think it is definitely something that's in the atmosphere. It's a hot topic now, and I think therefore it should be talked about in YA literature. And I'm not saying that's good, but it's a reality that a lot of students in America are facing these days.
Sure.
And so I think in that sense, it should be talked about. But I think if you're going to handle and tackle something like that, you need to do your research.
Yeah.
Sure.
There is a movie, I've not seen it yet, but I've seen clips of The Fallout with Jenna Ortega.
Haven't seen it
I've
either.
heard is good, or raises awareness in an appropriate way. But I just think more research needs to be done and some kind of plot point. I think Davis is untapped potential too in that sense, depending on which way you want to swing.
Yeah.
I agree with Holly that, like, because it is a reality, especially in America, it's something that literature deserves to have the opportunity to discuss and talk about. But because it's literature and not just history, it doesn't exist to just represent what actually occurs. And it also doesn't exist to be used as like a dramatic fight or action scene, which is how it's used in this book. Onision, if you're going to include a school shooting, which again, I don't categorically oppose in your novel or novella or short story or any writing, I think it's important that you approach that knowing what role that serves in your story, not just on a plot level, but on a theme level. Like, what is the goal conceptually of including a school shooting? Do you want to call to mind a certain critique of the structures that permit that to occur? Do you want to delve into the psychology of the perpetrators? Do you want to tell it from a victim's point of view? And if so, why do you want to do any of those things? And then you can consider how you're going to do it. But I think understanding why you want to do it is going to be step one.
I think, too, there's this unspoken kind of rule between all kinds of writers. Maybe not rule, but, like, don't do more harm than good. And I think...
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very common thing, but I think that's really something to consider as well with this. It shouldn't just be a plot point, a plot device. It really needs to be conceptualized in a larger narrative arc because, again, you're making commentary whether or not you realize you're doing that.
Yeah. Some things that happen in stories because of the cultural context in which they exist will feel more momentous just by nature. Like, they just will. It's unavoidable. And so when you put a school shooting in a story, that is something that it is impossible to then just move on from.
Right.
That, like, is a story dominating fact. And the way that the book introduces it and then just, like, zips right along comes across as, like, kind of insensitive.
Oh, yeah, it's incredibly problematic, I feel like. And it's almost, to me, at times feels like the purpose of serving is to make Abby and James closer, which perhaps could be a byproduct. I mean, trauma bond, I guess. I mean, you know, it could be a byproduct, but it doesn't need to be the main focus. That's not why you just throw that in there.
Right.
That also says something pretty concerning about their relationship, that if it takes a trauma bond for it to strengthen or at least be maintained, that might suggest that maybe the relationship isn't the most wholesome.
And I think fleshing in that same vein, fleshing out characters, which, Andrew, I know you want to talk about your favorite character, Davis, so this might be a good time to do that as well. But I think fleshing out those characters, again, Greg, jump scare, your female characters, and giving them their own agency and autonomy. You know, Abby's in art class. Maybe she's really interested in art. I don't know. There's a lot you could do with that there.
I liked what they were getting at with the stitching together the teddy bears. I thought that would be something more of a through line, or the hamster cage, or they had some ideas. If she was just like some weird sculptor, then that could be fun. That could be easy. That
would have been a much better line to end the novel on too, like them stitching the thing together. You know, it being symbolic of their patchy but firm relationship or something like that. I mean, obviously that wouldn't be true within the actual text, but like that would be a way that the text could at least insist on its own truth in a way.
Notwithstanding kind of the shock value of some of the events, I was so compelled by the conceit of these horrible, horrible things happening in quick succession and people persevering and loving through all of that. And Davis is emblematic of that in a way, but it just doesn't coalesce because he chose to put a school shooting in the middle of the book and then forget about it.
I feel like there's this in the events of this novel. It's either nothing is happening or a lot, something really big is happening. And I feel like some kind of middle ground, one I had thought of was, you know, he is the TA for Mr. Hanson. I think that could be an occasion where stakes could be raised. Perhaps James needs, maybe this is a position that pays, I don't know how you would configure that, perhaps a private school of some sort. I don't, there's other implications there, but maybe James has to do this thing in order to keep his scholarship at the school or to get a recommendation letter to a college. I think in the small things, the stakes need to be raised. Maybe in their little apartment that James and Abby stay in, the landlord notices that they're underage and living together and they have to navigate how are they going to continue. I feel like Miss Robertson's untapped potential. If, Greg, you want to keep Davis's death, I think a lot more work needs to be done there. Davis is also falling in the trap of your female characters, perhaps because Davis seems to be portraying more of a stereotypically feminine energy in the story where he is just swooning over a male that gives him no attention. But that's a whole psychoanalyzed thing I won't get into.
I really like those ideas, in particular the first one about having James be paid by Mr. Henderson for his job. I like the idea of it being at a private school where he has to fill this role for a scholarship, but I also think it could be interesting if, Onision, it's important to you that this stays in like a rural, poverty-stricken setting, that maybe Mr. Henderson is paying James under the table and he could potentially lose his job if he's caught. So then not only does that raise the stakes, but it gives Mr. Henderson a little bit more depth. It shows what a limb he's willing to go out on for James. And it also gives their characters more reasons to interact and develop alongside each other. I think that could potentially save Mr. Henderson from being such a flat and static character.
Yeah, going in another direction. Cut the president.
Yes.
Make it something more realistic. Governor. I feel like I could totally buy the governor come into the school. Don't mute me for this, Greg, but perhaps it's a female governor, and I think that could add a layer in there. In that same vein, I know Jason kind of behaves badly in some parts. Well, that's an understatement, but I think giving him more depth to his characters, well, just overall, a little more dig into why these people are the way they are, because what makes a good villain is not so much that they're a good person, but just that they're a good character. You want your reader to understand, at least to some kind of extent, why someone may be acting the way they are. Very rarely is someone just scratching their chin, being like, how can I ruin this person's life?
Yeah.
They have their own motivations.
Yeah, now what I would not want to see is suddenly Jason having a tragic backstory about like abusive parents or something like that. I would want it to be something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more immediate. Like maybe he just feels really lonely and he's jealous of what James and Abby have. Something simple, something that doesn't have to be bombastic or so Darksteel the Hedgehog. Yeah. Just sort of normal. Can it be normal? Can it just be normal?
Can it just be normal?
Yes. Well, I don't think it can, because this is just Greg in a book, and he won't let anyone else into it. The biggest problem with your book, Greg, is the last line of the From the Author page, where you just say, Erica, thank you for pointing out 2 word errors, specifying that it was only 2, because of course it's only 2, because Greg is an unassailable writer who can do no wrong. With self-published works, it's like a pro se litigant. You're supposed to interpret them in the most favorable light possible, give them the benefit of the doubt. So like having some weird formatting issues in a self-published book, not the problem. It is saying, oh, I had people edit it and they only found 2 problems, and then just showing the sloppiest prose when you turn the page. And I just feel like it's just an emblem of every other problem in this book.
There were so many errors in the book.
So many errors.
At least in my copy. And you might not always catch everything, I suppose, but it was just beyond what even... Yeah.
Well, it looks like it was written by somebody that doesn't interact with fiction, because if they did, they would understand that when a new person is talking, you generally begin a new paragraph, at the very least.
Yeah.
Which, for me, metatextually raised the question, why is this a novel? And is it just because Onision, like many people who approach writing for the first time without really considering it as a craft or an art, thinks, well, I know how to write, so I can do this, so it's easy. On one hand, I am glad that many people have access to writing and that they can express themselves in that way. But when they're going to take the step of putting out a book and calling it literature without having really much respect for the genre, that's when, for me, it becomes sort of a ideological issue.
Right.
Again, I'm not saying at all that people shouldn't write short stories or novels if they want to. I'm not saying they should have to have read all of the world's classic literature before they can write a sentence. But I do think that if you're going to put out a book, you should at least familiarize yourself with the genre and the market and how they function.
Right, that's just good literary citizenship.
Yes.
It's like you said, I mean, it's one thing to just write whatever you want to write for yourself, but if you are going to take that step of having an imprint where other people can access it, I think you need to think about the implications of, okay, what if somebody picks this book up and reads it? What are they going to come away with? Are they going to come away with, this relationship between Abby and James is healthy and good? Are they going to come away with, this is just normal? Like, what is the implications of this thing you're putting out? You want to make sure that commentary that you're showing is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like a biographical lens when we're doing critique, but I think it's very important here because we're talking a lot about, he doesn't seem to be very good with literary citizenship. He doesn't seem to be able to take critique very well. I want to read you guys a list of the things that really did happen in Onision's life that are represented here and see if that colors your interpretation of things.
Yes, sounds good.
He did know someone named Abby, and he did write her a letter, which was more or less exactly what was in the book.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that did happen. And I think the fiction began after Abby confronted him.
Oh my God.
She did have an abusive boyfriend. He did lose his best friend in high school. He was basically Onision's only friend for most of high school, just like Davis in the book. Here's the interesting one to me. I did have a teacher and guidance counselor who admired me in high school. My guidance counselor and my English teacher were both very supportive. Miss Robertson was originally written to be just like my actual counselor, but I later turned her into someone completely different in the book. Now, where do you guys think that point happened where he made that change in her?
Was it when she suddenly became evil for no reason?
And, I don't know, set the school on fire?
It might have been.
That is so bizarre. Like, I don't understand what the goal is between mixing fact and fiction in this way when it doesn't seem like the way that he's recombined elements is in any way, like, transformative. I mean, it transforms it in the sense that it is now different than it was,
right.
But it doesn't elevate it.
Right, it just jumps off a cliff into Fantasyland. Yeah.
I feel like, too, in fiction, I think it's understood with a lot of fiction writers that you are adding in elements of real life. A lot of people like to write about things they know, but it sounds like, to the point he's writing, it just needs to be creative nonfiction if he's going that hard. I think if you are going to fictionalize stuff that happens to you, it needs to be harder brought in fiction. You need to understand that you're not writing nonfiction. You are writing a fictionalized account of something that may or may not have happened.
He also skated to school. That one's not as exciting, but I could not believe it. I don't believe it reading it. There's no way he roller skated to school and didn't get stuffed in a locker.
Glad to know he fancies himself a real world Ramona Flowers.
Yes!
Raymond Flowers.
He's like Raymond Flowers. Well, I just thought that was interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah. And it makes me wonder if then Abby's sort of pushing back against the letter, but then immediately forgiving him, and then his immediate reworking of his entire perception of her, like within the span of minutes, is a literal rewrite of what actually occurred and like a way to sort of like atone.
Mm-hmm.
This is veering off into pure speculation town, but I can really easily see the real life Abby reacting with like horror and very severe discomfort, and then him desperately trying to make it up to her with all kinds of apologies to the point where she finds it overbearing, and then he, for the rest of his life, can't understand why she didn't want to be his friend, and now he's trying to sort of like relitigate the events or something like that.
Yeah.
One can only believe.
Mr. Hanson sighed deeply and looked down at the floor. He then asked, "Did anyone else almost pass out?" The class erupted with laughter as the teacher wiped sweat from his forehead with the towel he used as a whiteboard eraser. The towel smeared ink all over his forehead, which made us all laugh even harder. Unfortunately, I was faced with the reality that he would blame his humiliation on me if I did not tell him right away, as my next period still required I act as a teacher's assistant for him. I think that really illustrates the, like, over-explanation and, like, the stage directioniness of some of the visual gags.
Yes, there's so many visual gags.
It's like, over-explain jokes, like those meme accounts that like explain the joke and then it's not funny anymore. The entire time I was reading this book, I was like, I just need to go take a shower. Well, Greg, Onision on YouTube, we've talked about the things we don't hate. We've talked about the things perhaps you should consider. We've given you some advice. I think maybe you are screaming and running around a room because of my presence, which does bring me delight in knowing that I did not read this book for nothing, and also to become a guest on this podcast. But now our time is coming to the end as we reflect on this fictional journey we've taken together.
And Greg, as we're closing out, I would just like to say, this is why we don't hate you. We can tell that you are interested in fiction and literature. You have clearly put a lot more work into this than some people do, having written 3 entire books that kind of act as parallel narratives. None of that, I'm sure, was easy, nor was it a quick process. I'm sure that it was quite time-consuming and emotionally taxing. So we want to respect that with our critiques, and do our best to give you actionable advice that you could, maybe revise with someday. But in the meantime, it might be worth examining what your goals are from the outset before you put the pen to the page.
Yeah.
Agreed. Some self-reflection never hurt anybody.
Now's a great chance to start. Now that you've had this this feedback that you so desperately asked us directly for in real life.
Explicitly requested in writing.
Yes. Given to us on a silver platter, as is the tradition here at St. Balasar University. I hope you have something to take home.
It's the silver that's so key. That's
Yes.
what makes the spell binding.
Right.
I mean, that's how my invitation came to be on the show.
Yeah.
I just couldn't say no.
Right.
Yeah, the man, we don't know his name, but he wears sort of a tuxedo. He appears on your doorstep
Yes.
with the silver platter. You can't focus on his face for whatever reason. It's just your attention shifts right off of it. And he hands you the book, and he says, you know what you must do. And then suddenly you're in a recording studio.
That's exactly what happened to me,
You got lucky this time, though, because sometimes Vad Deverell from Gothicon is also here.
Now, if he showed up at my doorstep, I would not answer the door.
Every time I'm summoned, I just pray that he won't materialize.
Well, Greg, I said this to you before, but I'll be praying for you. God loves you, and I wish you the best in all of your future endeavors.
Like they say on VeggieTales, and like we say at the end of every episode, God loves you the most, and no matter what, Greg.
The religious rants weren't as bad, or even present in this one, but they were so bad in the first one that I was just like, the funniest thing you could say to someone like that is, I'm going to be praying for you.
He needs it.
That's it for now. Be sure to follow us wherever you're listening, and also connect with us on Twitter or Instagram. I run the Instagram, Jay runs the Twitter. We have our email open at englishclubpodcast@gmail.com.
We also have a brand new sparkly website over at englishclubpodcast.com. Feel free to check it out. We have some links to our socials, links to some of our fan favorite videos, and links to the entire show as well.
So, with that out of the way, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Holly, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I was really excited to wander into the recording studio today and hang out with you all.
Yeah, it was really great to have you. I feel like our discussion was like so enhanced by having a fiction MFA with us.
Thank you.
You really stoned my Abigail. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I don't know how I feel about
Okay.
that.
Yeah, no, I don't either. Well, on that note, we will see you guys around campus. Keep in touch.
See you around campus.
See you around.
Abby's laughter was trailing off now as she returned, fully upright. You okay, Abby? I asked. She replied with a smile.
Yup, hubby, I'm just fine.
She and I turned around to continue looking at the burnt school. Suddenly I realized something. A small smile crossed my lips. Well, I guess this means I won't be running for president.
Smash cut. End credits.
Right. Oh,
I'm trying to think what would be a good, credits song that would really hit right there at the end.
Something with, kazoos. Like the Amazing World of Gumball outro.
That's what the point of the mask is.
I mean, I remember when I finished it, I was like, is this actually it? Did I just read the wrong copy? Like, where is this? Why? What is it? This man cannot be president.
This man cannot be president.
Him becoming class president is like so irrelevant to the overall story. The fact that he would dedicate the whole ending to that and let that be the note we go out on.
It doesn't make any sense. Like, there is no, like, if you were trying to plot this book out, it doesn't make any logical sense in any narrative structure.
It has really no arc to speak
No.
of.
It's character focused, but the characters don't do anything.